Welcome to my review of Bruce Lee Return of the Legend for the Game Boy Advance. This was a game I didn't know about. My good friend, actually, he checks out a lot of licensed games, so he told me about it and said it was pretty decent, and it turned out to be, a pretty decent game. Not great by any means, but it was kind of a fun game to add to the kill list, the game's beaten list. I think it took somewhere around 3 hours for me to beat, so it wasn't too difficult. But it does have a few frustrating parts as far as there's a few sections where you have to try to collect all these keys to open these gates, which can be a little irritating when you don't know exactly where to go. So it's not a completely linear game. It has linear parts, but there's quite a few parts that branch off where you have to go and search rooms and go up ladders and shit and take a few different paths in the levels. There's also, which is a part of the game that I don't really like that type of gameplay, but it's just a personal preference. But the part that I think was pretty damn weak was the stealth. The stealth is really, really rigid trial and error type of bullshit. It's not hard to pull off. It's just you're gonna fail it a lot of times because if you get spotted, you instantly fail, as you'll see here. I don't know if it's this part, but you'll see it soon. Basically what happens, if you get spotted, you instantly fail, so then you got to start back at the last checkpoint you got to. Now, you do get checkpoints pretty frequently, but you do have to do some long stealth sections where you're going to most likely die multiple times until you figure out exactly where you have to move and when you have to move. So it's just going to be just rigid trial and error type of bullshit, which is definitely a weak aspect of the game. So this is some of the tutorial sequence early on in the game. This part actually I think is an early part where you have to fight a few groups of enemies to beat the stage. So there are some parts like that where you'll have to fight a few mobs of enemies. You have some pretty decent moves. You have your regular punch combo when you mash punch. And you have kicks and things like that. And one of the best moves is this rolling kick that you see me doing here. You can kind of spam that and pull a lot of bullshit. Most of the bosses are going to be about exploiting them, with maybe a single move and shit like that. There's usually some kind of trick. They're not really well-designed boss fights, but they're entertaining enough if you're just looking for, like I said, a serviceable game to kind of play through. Just something to beat. And it's really not a bad game. It's pretty solid. But it's not going to stand out as any kind of classic or anything like that. But it's a far cry from some of the licensed games we used to get back on the NES. By this point on the Game Boy Advance, it seems like they had made some vast improvements on, not just releasing complete shitty licensed games. There was actually quite a few decent licensed games on the Game Boy Advance from what I've tried. So I think one of the Buffy games seemed pretty good too from the videos I saw. I got to check it out. I think my friend said he played it and it was pretty decent. So I'll definitely be checking out more of these games and reviewing them, as well as tutorials on some of them. This one was kind of drawn out. I didn't think that this one would be good for a tutorial. But here you see, the trial and error stealth sequences. Here's a little taste of that. See, the guy's not even facing me, and he spotted me somehow, right? So it's kind of bullshitty. So now I'm going up here. I'm thinking maybe I got to go, up high or something to get past this guy. No, he sees me up there, so you get the idea. There is a way around that, and you'll see it in my playthrough video. It's not like it's that complicated, but you got to do exactly what the fucking game wants you to do. It's one of those things where it's not clear what the game is trying to get you to do. So you got to just guess, and eventually, I guess you could probably learn the AI or whatever, or the way it works. But for me, it always felt shitty whenever there was stealth because usually I'd get spotted for some weird reason. And, you go in one area to avoid one guy, and then you don't see the guy on the other side of the screen. He sees you from across the screen. So, it's a trial and error of having to map out, each position you have to go to, and it's just a memorization thing. It's not hard. It just kills the pacing. I don't like that kind of shit. I do appreciate that they tried to inject a little variety into the gameplay, which is cool, but a lot of times I can have mixed results. Now the bosses, as you see, I can just spam this rolling kick and retreat, So pretty damn simple bosses. Now I'm showing another boss. I'm showing a few bosses here just to give you an idea of how effective this move is. So you can kind of just spam it and retreat, and this fucks up the bosses. They don't really deal with this too well. Now some bosses it's not effective, but you'll see me use other cheap techniques on the bosses. So that is, you could say that's another flaw with the gameplay, is that the bosses are very simple and easy to exploit. So are the enemies. Most of the enemies are very easy to take out. And the main challenge comes from occasionally getting spotted. There is some platforming, but it's nothing difficult. The biggest annoyances for me were having to get keys and shit like that, since I hate collecting keys and doing that kind of shit. But I know some people probably like that. I think it would have been better if they just made it a linear action game. I mean, the mechanics were pretty solid. Maybe if they made the bosses a little bit more involved, because the game does have block and stuff like that, and some pretty advanced moves for this kind of game. So, I mean, they could have made the combat more nuanced. But it's very simple to exploit, and, there's not really much reason to use. I think I used the block, for one encounter in the entire game. So, it's really underutilized. And sometimes it's iffy with the platform. See how I was trying to grab that platform and the guy just didn't grab it? There is some spottiness with the controls. The running is also irritating. Sometimes I would run when I didn't want to and run off a ledge or something like that. I don't remember if this game had a separate run button. I think it might have been double tap only. Double tap forward to run, but regardless, it would happen sometimes when I didn't want it to happen. So the controls, sometimes I would double tap the run and the character would stand there like a fucking dumbass. So, controls can be a little spotty. I mean, for the most part, they're pretty decent. The controls really aren't that bad, but they're definitely not perfect. So now this was one of the harder bosses where I actually had to do something. First off, I can spam this rolling kick for his first form, if you want to call it that. But after you take out his first form, well, this might have been the end of the fight. No, maybe not. No, I think this is his second form. So for his second form, I actually had a block for maybe the only time in the game, so I would block and then counter, basically. So, it's still very fucking easy. Just hold block and then counter after he finishes his combo. This is not fucking complicated. So he's going to do the same shit again and again. And when he finishes his combo, you just mash punch. That was about it. But this was one of the more sophisticated boss fights for this game. But yeah, not much to it. So now the stealth gets really anal as you get late into the game. You'll see there's going to be more of this stealth where you have to do long stealth sequences for quite a while. Luckily, you do get checkpoints, but some of them are very obscure in what you have to do, and I didn't understand them. So it took me a while to figure out. I also checked videos, and even when I checked videos sometimes, I didn't really understand exactly what was going on. So here I'm just showing with save states. I'm showing I was practicing this segment with save states. I don't count that as a legit completion when I practice, but I was just practicing to try to understand what was going on. You got to do this in a very specific way. You get spotted super quick. And like I said, it's really not that hard, but the controls are kind of shitty sometimes, so you fall off a ledge when you want to jump. So here's just some regular stage gameplay a little later in the game where you have to collect maybe 4 keys to get through the 4 gates. And it's just kind of irritating. I mean, I don't like when I have to fucking explore and find shit. But that's just a thing that's always bothered me in games, unless it's done right. I mean, I love something like Dark Souls where the exploration is fucking awesome. It's rewarding. And you have a lot of options as to where you can go. You don't have to just take one path at all times. So I like that kind of exploration. Or something like the Metroid games does it in an awesome way. But, with something like this, it's just there, just to kind of fill out the game and make it take longer, I think. But the combat remains pretty simple most of the time. I mean, mostly just mash and kick. Now, for this Chuck Norris ripoff guy, you mainly just kick him, and he usually falls for that. He's kind of immune to the rolling kicks, but the regular kick will destroy him. So you got some more kind of climbing and platforming type of shit. Which is not too bad. It plays decently enough. occasionally shit like that does happen where I don't grab the ledge for some reason, which I'm not sure why, but I mean, it works, for the most part. At least they give you checkpoints pretty close in these areas usually, so you're not too far off. Now, this is the final boss gauntlet. So you got to take out maybe 3 or 4 bosses, and then there's like a final boss. And, you can use the same kind of spam moves that you used on most of these bosses, and it still works. And then for maybe the last boss, I had to switch up the strat a little bit. But it was still very simple. You get plenty of healing items during the last fight, too, so it's not too bad. But yeah, this is a pretty solid game overall, I think it's good for what it is. But yeah, you see, you can also get some weapon pickups like nunchucks, darts, things like that you can swap between. So, I mean, those can be useful too, but most of the time your standard moves work just fine. The enemies really fall for your standard moves the most, it seems. So, the weapons can be useful, but, they're not super helpful. The darts are useful in the stealth sequences because you can throw a dart out from across the screen and take an enemy out. So that way you don't get spotted. It will instantly kill the enemy. So the darts are probably the most useful weapon, but that's about it. So now you got Chuck Norris again. He does not deal well with kicks to the chest. So just get up close and you combo him with some kicks. Usually works decently enough. You do have a decent little variety of moves, as you can see. It's just that the moves are not really the game is not really adjusted well for the amount of moves they give you, because you don't really need that many of them. So it's kind of underutilized. This guy's kind of similar. You get in close with the jump kicks and then kind of combo him with chest kicks, so he's not too difficult. There's little specific things that all the bosses fall for, so you don't have to try to block their attacks or do any of that shit. There's only one boss, like I said, where I actually blocked. So it's really, really underutilized with all the the little moves they give you, but I still thought it was an enjoyable game overall to play through. So for me, I'd give the game a 6.5. I think it's decent, not quite what I consider a good game, which would be in the 7 range. But I think it's a solid game, decent, definitely worth a playthrough if you're just looking for a kind of fun game to play through that actually plays well. Let me know if you have any questions, and thanks for watching.